Hey everyone, welcome to another Patreon topic video. This one is for Kinotosi, and the topic is one that dates back all the way to the ancient Shmup philosophers. Throughout time it's been debated which reigns supreme, horizontal or vertical, which is better, which do I prefer, which is more popular, what makes them the same, what makes them different. Let's draw the battle lines here. So, of course this is such a broad concept and such a tangled one that I decided to begin by trying to get some concrete information, sort of. So what I did is I went to my Twitter and I asked my followers. I believe I got about 139 responses, so I think that's a pretty healthy sample size. My statistics knowledge is a little rusty, but I think that's kind of in the ballpark of healthy samples. So the results came back that 80% chose vertical and 20% chose horizontal, which sort of confirmed what I suspected just through interacting with people over the years and seeing the way Shmups release, where usually it is kind of a ratio of many more verticals with the occasional horizontal slit in there. And if you look at the catalogs, especially recently, most devs favor vertical, and then they'll have their few horizontal ones they'll throw out, K for example. So let's begin by just talking about the basics and talking about at least where I stand. So I definitely went back and forth with this early on. Like I've said many times, I began with Gunbird, Axelay, and Blazing Star. Those were kind of my trifecta of shmups that I played when I was first getting into them. And two of those were horizontals, and then of course Gunbird, which is my favorite. But during that time, especially when I was first playing it and hitting those difficulty walls in Gunbird, I definitely appreciated horizontals, because the thing about it is I think horizontals tend to be more accessible to people starting shmups, and maybe that's a little bit of a fault of mine, where whenever I'm usually suggesting a shmup to someone, it almost always is a vertical, like a first timer. Like in my own video, for instance, I chose a Toho game, right? That's a vertical shmup. And so, but if you think about it, most gamers who have a background in platformers and all those types of things, even running guns, are going to probably feel a little bit more comfortable playing horizontals at first, because just the way your eyes track things and the way you kind of understand the level design translates a little better. And that's something about horizontals that usually is different than vertical shmups. I'm talking generally, of course, because there's many exceptions, but generally horizontal shmups are more levels than vertical shmups, where they have stage hazards, walls. I'm thinking Blazing Star, there's like turbines you have to go through. There's just sort of more of a level design type of element, more classical level, platformer style level design, where you have different sections, and then you have stage hazards, and you have to juggle the enemies and all those sorts of things. Squeeze through here, go through this tunnel here, go around this branching path there. And that can happen in vertical shmups, but especially as of late, vertical shmups are more like just blank canvases with enemies on them, enemies and bullets. There's usually not too many stage hazards, and that is usually kind of just a little novelty factor, rather than being a core part of the level design, where I feel like in horizontal shmups, generally, the stages themselves and how they're laid out play into the gameplay a lot more. Axelay is a great example of that. Almost all the stages have a good deal of level design that forces you in different scenarios, and you're fighting the walls of the level just as much as you're fighting the bosses. And so it's a different skill set, whereas in vertical shmups, you're mostly just manipulating enemies, bullet patterns, making your way through those types of things. So that's a good point to begin, is that I think horizontal shmups tend to be more accessible and a little bit more understood by people first coming into the genre, I'm assuming. And then another aspect of horizontal shmups that makes it different than vertical shmups is just the way you track bullets between the two, right? And it's a bit hard to articulate this point without sounding kind of vague, but I just noticed whenever I play horizontal shmups, even bullet hells like Rolling Gunner, it's a sort of different skill set to watching and following those bullets than it is with vertical. Just the way your eyes move across the screen, and I think, again, people who've played video games their whole lives, especially 2D platformers and things like that, they tend to naturally know where to look more on a horizontal shmup. I think it gives you more clues where the hell you need to look. Like, okay, there's a bend coming up here. Oh, there's a cluster of enemies right here. You know, they know where to look. But actually, in a vertical shmup, especially in some bullet hell games, where you look can be a mystery to, especially people first starting the game. I know I was like typing into Google, where do you look in shmups, right? And there's different answers. Look at your ship sprite. Look ahead of your ship sprite. Look in the enemy formations. Look here, look there. Of course, I'll have to do a video on that at some point. But yeah, where to look is, I think, a little bit more ambiguous in a vertical shmup than it is in a horizontal shmup, typically speaking. And so again, that's another factor of accessibility. And then there's the history, where horizontal shmups have a history of being more along the lines of classic styles, right? When you think about the classic shmup series, Gradius, R-Type, Darius, I'm sure I'm missing more of them, Sexy Parodius, because I like to say that, they all are horizontal shmups, and so I think people who are a little bit more into the classic style tend to prefer horizontal just because of that. And then when you start thinking of bullet hells and Danmakus and caravan shooters, or whatever those are called, those tend to be vertical shmups, right? With some exceptions like Rolling Gunner, Pro Gear, Akai Katana. But most of them tend to be vertical, and it makes sense because, like I said, vertical level design typically is all about the bullets and the enemy layouts rather than stage hazards and things like that, because stage hazards don't really fit as well into that aspect ratio. And what's funny is I have some funny examples of kind of bending these rules and seeing what comes of it. The first one is when I had a well, I still have my PS Vita, I just use my Switch now. But when I was playing on my PS Vita a lot, I was able to emulate Dodonpachi on it. The issue is when you have Dodonpachi and Tate on your PS Vita, the screen is so tiny and the bullet's so tiny, it's like basically impossible to play or see. So I was like, okay, I have to swap this, vertically. But the problem is when you're holding your Vita vertically, it's really awkward to hit the D-pad and the buttons. It's not impossible, but it's, it's awkward. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be cute, and I'm going to switch it to be vertical. I'm going to rotate it sideways, but I'm going to play it normally. So I'm basically playing it with the screen rotated, turning Dodonpachi into a horizontal shmup. It's like, this could be fun and interesting. It was pretty of a head-inducing experience there, where my brain could not, probably because of the way the sprites were laid out and everything, but my brain could not quite accept that aspect ratio, and I even, or that screen rotation, and I even feel like the gameplay, like where you want to move naturally in a vertical shmup and a horizontal shot tends to be different, so I was ending up in weird positions just because I felt like, oh, this is a good way to go. And so that's another thing too, is where you look and where you move, at least in my experience, tends to be a little bit different. Horizontal shmups, I found I'm almost like always like dead center or close to dead center, whereas in vertical shmups I'm more towards the back. And then there's games like Rolling Gunner and stuff where you can be anywhere on that damn screen because of the way the mechanics work. But think of Death Smiles, for instance, right? Death Smiles is a great example of this, where you're not in the back of the screen because enemies spawn back there. You're in the center and you go back and forth. I think that's another thing too, is enemies spawning behind you in vertical shmups is always really awkward and weird. It's like always tricky. I'm thinking of bullet patterns like the fifth boss in Ketsui, his first pattern where he's got those bullets that come up from the floor. Man, that's always a struggle to dodge that, that sort of formation. Whereas you think about horizontal shmup, stuff spawns behind you all the time in horizontal shmups, and it's not weird because your eyes are used to looking left and right, but your eyes are just, on vertical shmups, you're not used to looking upwards, right? You're used to looking downwards. So it's really interesting how that works. I'd love to hear more, like anatomy type theory of why that works, why that is. I'm sure you can, of course, get used to it, but It's just interesting how the eyes perceive. And so before I close the video, I want to talk about some interesting future developments for both of these, because I think they both are in an interesting place when it comes to aspect ratios. I love talking about aspect ratios when I can, and this is the perfect opportunity. So, back in the arcade days, right, we're playing on 4x3 or 3x4, depending on how you rotate the monitor. And a lot of shmups that come out still honor these aspect ratios. Zero Ranger, for instance, Crimson Clover, all these honor those classic aspect ratios, even though they're kind of the era of 16:9 monitors. But now we're seeing more shmups coming out that are not honoring these classic, at least horizontals. That's what I'm talking about. So horizontal shmups are sort of starting to walk away from 4x3 and go into 16:9. Rolling Gunner is a perfect example of this. Rolling Gunner is not 4x3 game, it's a 16:9 game, which actually makes the level design different and interesting. And I feel like, personally, whenever you have a 16:9 horizontal shmup, I think you need to start scaling up the size of the sprites and stuff, because otherwise you just get way too much screen real estate. And so this is going to be really interesting when it comes to vertical shmups. Basically, the solution for horizontal shmups is make the sprites bigger, make the bullets, just make things look bigger, basically, and I think you're completely fine. But the question is with vertical shmups, because vertical shmups are in a really weird position right now as far as their aspect ratios, because we're rotated, but the screens are getting longer and longer. They're not getting wider. So with horizontals, it sort of fits, right? Because it's getting longer, but it's still sort of, it feels nice to still play. But I'm trying to imagine these vertical shmups getting longer and longer. Are we just going to see more of the screen, or how is that going to work? We could, of course, make the sprites bigger, but everything gets skinnier, whereas in a horizontal shmups, I don't think it's as big of a deal, because you could just make walls and things like that for the areas that are kind of awkward, right? Like, for instance, the front and the sides, you could just make kind of like blast zones or walls or spawn zones or something to sort of keep the aspect ratio in check. But in a vertical shmup, that would be weird to do. And so are we just going to start getting, because the monitors are getting longer, so we're either just going to play on these massive, because monitors just keep getting wider, we're going to play on these massive rotated monitors that have like most of the screen black, or like with gadgets, I guess, or something, and then we could stick to the 3x4, or we go 16:9 and somehow figure out how that will look, where we're going to make differences and stuff. So I think it's interesting what's going to happen with vertical shmups, and I'm interested here. I have some indie devs who follow this channel stuff, what their thoughts are. They're working on their shmups. Are they going to start using 16:9 vertically? Because then it gets weird too if you tate, right? Most people are going to play in tate, and so you're just going to get skinnier and skinnier tates. And so in summary, then, I feel like what you're going to like probably is going to come down to the style of gameplay you prefer. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but most people who like the later style, Danmaku, bullet hells, they're all about the bullet tracking, all about manipulating enemy patterns, and those types of things, like myself, are going to probably prefer verticals. Whereas people who like the classic style of, the levels being a factor in the gameplay and a little bit more tactical and looking ahead and planning things out a little, kind of visually and stuff, will probably enjoy the horizontal. And it's probably easier to get into horizontal shmups than it is to get into vertical when you're first getting into them, because you're just used to tracking things left to right rather than up and down. So anyway, that is the end of the video. It's hard to really conclude this, so I'll just end by thanking my patrons: Joe Angelo, John, Kay, Quentin, Mark Sloan, Maz, Nathaniel Davis, N Electron, Okla Kugels, Umcall, Resosis, Sugumo, Young Money Sui, Plasmo, Utukaya, Bahoy TV 100, Malays, Mayhair Calendrian, Dingo, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Brian Shiver, Double Vision, Depths 20XX, Dunpeel 2064, EC 2151, Full Set, Retro Shmuparch, Gus, Kiwi, Jacob Spring, and Jake Ryan. Thanks for watching.